Hackney secular singers, I think a very appropriate rendition for a talk on pessimism. As I think Susanna mentioned, this is unfortunately going to be a very bad lecture. I've brought you here under false pretenses. You will learn almost nothing. You will come away from this talk disappointed, thinking that I've let you down, that you've learnt almost nothing, that your life has not been enhanced. Things will then start getting worse. You will come to the realization that life is essentially meaningless, that your efforts are headed nowhere, and then at some point you'll be struck down by death, and your loved ones and all your achievements will wither and be returned to dust. These are the basic facts of human life, though they are often denied. But here we've come together today to put the darkness on the table and to look at it fairly and squarely. So I want to sing a hymn in praise of looking at the glass half empty, and do want to emphasize to you the wisdom and indeed the beauty of thinking of life as an essentially deeply troubled and compromised affair. We're currently living in troubled times, and many of us respond to these troubled times with a feeling of injured self-pity, as though something that was supposed to have gone right has gone wrong. I would like to reverse the equation. Nothing was entirely supposed to go right, and so nothing has particularly gone wrong. We've simply returned to a state of crisis, which is the norm in human history. It's sometimes the principle of newspapers that murder, disease, crisis is the exception. It makes the news. But in fact, this is the news. This is all that ever happens. So, as I say, this feeling of being in a historically abnormal position is really a misreading of the true facts of existence, which is an almost continuous series of crises. And let's try and remember, none of us were happy, particularly in 2004, when things were going supposedly so well. We had all sorts of troubles on our minds. Certainly I did. I don't remember these boom times being so great. Nothing boomed for me. So it's really a return, as I say, to the same. We do have in world culture two very important strands of thought, Buddhism and Christianity, that have emphasized that life is essentially an imperfect business. From an entirely secular point of view, and we are a secular organization talking in a secular hall, I'd like to recover some of that wisdom, some of the wisdom of thinking that essentially life is suffering and the human being is a fallen creature. I love the idea of fallenness. It's a wonderful starting point, and very good in a marriage or a relationship. Don't expect. I never said I was perfect. I'm a fallen creature. It's very hard for other people to come back at us on that one. So really, I want to try and emphasize, I say, the ever-present nature of suffering and unhappiness. But really, I want to talk about impotence first. Who here has been impotent recently? The devil. Anyone else suffered from impotence? You're just not being honest. Please, someone put up their hand, apart from me. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Lady up there? Okay, right. So, impotence. It's a fact of life. Now, very interesting thing about impotence. Impotence is all to do with pessimism and optimism. It's when there's a huge expectation on you for things to go really well. That's when people get impotent. And really this goes to the heart of what I want to be talking about today. There's a lovely, for those of you who know Montaigne's essays, Montaigne, 16th century French philosopher, wrote a wonderful essay all about impotence, in which his essential drift is, if you arrive in the bedroom, or bedchamber as he put it, with high expectations, there's a very serious risk that things will go wrong. So he counsels, there was a man, this is a true story, there was a man near his village who had failed with a woman, as he put it, and had cut off his member and had sent it to the woman in atonement for his error. And this had so disturbed the local community and so disturbed Montaigne that he picked up a pen to try and write about this. And his essential conclusion was, when entering the bedroom, always say that you are a bad lover. This is the only way, really, in which you can ever stand a chance of making it a good impression. You must always lower the expectations of performance. That's the way in which you can be a good lover. But I think there's a deeper point here. This is not just about sexual performance. This is about life performance. That somehow raising expectations and suggesting that all will go well is the surest way to get very nervous, and with nervousness comes failure. So there's a curious debt of success on a complete familiarity with failure. If you expect to succeed, you will almost certainly fail. So pessimism doesn't necessarily have to lead to a lack of achievement or a complete resignation. But very strangely, we have to start, I want to argue, from a feeling that things are not going to go well. Nowadays, our philosophers and thinkers and public figures are often in the business of trying to tell us how to cope with, how to make life better. Somehow the improvement of life is the way in which most problems are viewed. How can we make things go better? I want to direct your thoughts to a school of philosophy that flourished in ancient Rome and that took a completely different approach. I'm talking about Stoicism and the Stoic school of philosophy. When we speak of someone being stoic in the face of a disaster, we are very much plugged in to an ancestral memory of how the Stoics of ancient Rome went about things. One of my favorite Stoic philosophers is the philosopher Seneca, who lived in the time of Nero, a very troubled time for the Roman Empire. If we think we haven't got it bad, look at Nero's reign for what was going on then. And he very much believed that philosophy was a discipline to keep you sane in troubled times, and that one of the best ways to be sane was precisely to master pessimism, to make yourself at home in pessimism, to become a master of this strange and perhaps depressing seeming, but not actually depressing philosophy. Seneca wrote a book on anger. Very interesting thing about anger. Now, many of us nowadays think that anger is an almost physiological problem. It's to do with sort of being hot-blooded or something. Seneca thought that was nonsense. He believed that anger, we get angry for a very simple reason: optimism. Optimism makes us angry. And he compared a very interesting thing. He asked why people don't get angry when it rains. Particularly in Northern Europe. The reason why people don't get angry when it rains is that we expect it to rain. Particularly in England, it's amazing if it doesn't rain. So it would not occur to anybody to get angry at the fact it is raining. Now, the interesting thing is we don't adopt this very wise approach in all areas of life. Think about our keys. We start shouting when we lose the house keys, or how we behave when we're stuck in traffic. We insult people. We think, how come we're in traffic? Now, essentially, that is because we believe implicitly in a world in which keys never go astray and the roads are always mysteriously traffic-free. A very, very odd starting point for life. So it's our expectations that defines what will anger us. That's not to say we won't ever feel sad, but there's a difference between sadness and anger. And I think Seneca's point was we'll be a lot wiser if we manage to expect a lot more, that our sense of what is normal to expect is hugely reduced. So we get very surprised when people suddenly die or when things suddenly go wrong. He urges us to think, Seneca, that our fate is really in the hands of the goddess of fortune. Now, the goddess of fortune was held to be a woman who commanded all of our destinies. And the thing about her is that she's entirely fickle. She's cruel, vain, and may at any point decide that we will die and somebody else will succeed. Essentially, she's an uncontrollable entity in our lives. And in ancient Rome, the goddess of fortune was everywhere. There was her statue everywhere. She was on the back of coins, etc. And her message was, most of our life is in the hands of somebody else. And however much we try and achieve rational control, she will probably at some point get us. In order to try and cope with the vagaries of fortune, Seneca counselled us to undertake what he called, in Latin, a praemeditatio, a curious exercise called a premeditation. He advised that every morning, in bed, before getting up, you should essentially run through, in your mind, the whole day ahead of you and imagine every single disaster that could occur to you. Not because it would necessarily occur, but in order to protect you if it might. And I just want us to go through what Seneca says in his premeditation. He says, The wise will start each day with the thought that fortune gives us nothing which we can really own. Nothing, whether public or private, is stable. The destinies of men, no less than those of cities, are in a whirl. How often have cities in Asia been laid low by a single shock of an earthquake? How many towns in Syria? We live in the middle of things which have all been destined to die. Mortal have you been born, and to mortals have you given birth. So reckon on everything, expect everything. A year later, the town of Pompeii was destroyed. In other words, we live on unstable ground, and we must accept this in our very fundamental starting point. We must not react with injured surprise to bad things. These bad things are written into the contract of life. No one should have a child, wrote Seneca, without the ability to tolerate the thought that that child may be dead by evening. I have 2 children. He gives some lovely quotes which are oddly cheering. He says, "What need is there to weep over parts of life?" He says, "The whole of it calls for tears." There's also a lovely quote from him where he says, "A man must swallow a toad every morning to be sure of not meeting with anything more disgusting in the day ahead." We tried to have toad cereal here for you today, but it didn't come about. But essentially, the starting point has to be much more pessimistic. The interesting thing is, I always cheer up when I read this sort of stuff. And I think the reason is that some of the darkest thinkers are consoling. The reason I wanted Leonard Cohen is that listening to Leonard Cohen, particularly when you listen to it on CD, cheers you up. It makes you feel that somehow you're not alone in your sadness, that sadness, which can seem like an aberration, a departure from the norm, is in fact the basic default mode of human beings. And so the works of art have a huge role to play, I think, in confirming those dark hunches. It's very unfortunate, as I said a minute ago, that we live in a world full of hope. We live in a world surrounded by self-help books. And one of the things about self-help books is they're constantly telling us to get out of bed and achieve things and do wonderful things. I undertook a few years ago a bit of a study of the self-help genre. And I came across a self-help book which was perhaps one of the most depressing books I think I've ever read, unintentionally. It's by a man called Anthony Robbins. I don't know if any of you know him. Please don't read him if you don't. A few years ago, he wrote a book called Awaken the Giant Within. And the essential point is that all of us are small, he said, but all of us have a potential giant. And by reading his book, $16 on Amazon, we can start to grow and do amazing things. And he described how he had once been poor and small and depressed, but and fat as well, but he went on a diet, etc. I've got a little quote for you here. He goes, "I discovered a magical power in me to take back control of my physical well-being. I permanently rid myself of 38 pounds of fat. Through this dramatic weight loss, I attracted the woman of my dreams. I married her, and I created the family I'd always desired. I used my power to change my income from subsistence level to over $10 million a year. This moved me from a tiny apartment where I was washing my dishes in the bathtub because there was no kitchen to my family's current home, the Spanish-style Del Mar Castle, a picture of which he helpfully includes in his book." Okay. We all know the type of book. They're out there in Waterstones and everywhere else, and they're very, very depressing, but they're part of a wider movement, and that is the feeling that everybody can succeed, that opportunity is not just for the few, it's for the many. This is the message we hear from every single politician who ever stands up on a pulpit. Everyone can do it. No one should hold you back. You can do it. It's a beautiful idea, except it's got some serious drawbacks. One of the most serious drawbacks is it constantly leaves us feeling envious. Let me talk to you about envy. The interesting thing about envy is you don't envy everybody. It's, I think, very unusual for anyone in this room to envy the Queen. Anybody envy the Queen? I don't envy the Queen. The reason we don't envy the Queen is she's too weird. She's just so remote from us, we can't really relate to her. She lives in this odd palace, etc. However, who in this room has not envied someone at a school reunion or at a university reunion, or by reading something in the paper about someone they were once at school with or at university with? Anyone not felt that emotion? Oh, few, but not very many. About the same level as impotence. So basically, the reason for this is a sense of opportunity. We don't feel that we will envy the Queen because she feels too strange, she feels distant from us. We don't feel equal to her. As soon as you feel equal to somebody, as soon as you feel, I'm basically more or less like this person, and I could do this too, but you haven't, you will start to get envious and depressed. So a feeling of opportunity and equality and the fact that everybody can make it, this is, strangely, a really, really depressing starting point, which constantly leaves us a feeling that we haven't achieved enough. There's an interesting thing. When I was doing my little study of American self-help books, it struck me that if you look at self-help shelves in America, but I think probably all over, there are really two kinds of books. The first kind of book is like the Anthony Robbins type of book. You can do it, you can make it, it's out there. The other kind of book is a book telling you how to cope with what's euphemistically termed low self-esteem. And I think there's a real relationship. A society that tells people that they can achieve anything will also be a society that very swiftly develops a problem of self-esteem. Because simply if everybody expects to achieve everything, you're going to get an awful lot of people who are feeling that something's gone dramatically wrong with their lives. It's probably as unlikely today that you could become as successful as Bill Gates as it was unlikely in the 17th century that you could join the ranks of the French aristocracy. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels, from opening most magazines, etc., that if you had a garage and knew a little bit about software and had a few bright ideas, a few contacts, you could get there. Simple, really. It's not. Statistically, it is unbelievably small. I was talking to somebody in venture capital the other day who said to me that something like 98% of all business ideas ever submitted will fail. We don't hear that. We don't hear those stories. We are focused on a very, very small minority. Another thing that you always hear, another very optimistic but very depressing idea that is proposed in our optimistic society is the idea of meritocracy. Now, what is meritocracy? Meritocracy is the idea that if we all work hard enough at making society fair, we will be able to build a world where anybody can make it. You hear politicians on all sides of the political spectrum praising meritocracy. How can we get the school system working well enough that it can make a meritocratic world come true? Now, the interesting thing about a meritocracy is that it's got some very nasty, cruel side effects. If you really believe that we can build a world where everybody is going to end up where they merit to be, where they deserve to be, you'll also end up with a society in which anybody who doesn't, as it were, make it, deserves not to make it. If you believe in a world where those people who get to the top merit their success, you're implicitly also setting up a society where people deserve to fail and merit to fail. And the more people believe that we do live in a meritocracy, the more people will be very hard on themselves if they fail and very tough on others. I remember a little while ago I was in America, which is, after all, the center of meritocracy in many ways, of belief in meritocracy. And there was I was at a dinner with some friends, and everyone had a bit too much to drink. And there were a lot of jokes being made about white trash and trailer trash. And there was lots of hilarity about trailer trash and how funny it was that people were living on the edge of cities in caravans and having children with their children and all this sort of thing. And I said, oh, hang on a minute, this doesn't sound particularly funny here. I mean, what's going on? And this friend of mine piped up and she said, this really makes me feel my blood boil, because, you come from Europe and, you're all socialists and essentially you believe, that there's something wrong with this kind of attitude, whereas really I only got to where I got, and she was quite a high-powered person. I only got to where I got because I've worked hard. She said, my father was an alcoholic, but I made it, and I made it because of me, and so I deserve to be at the top. And if someone's in a trailer home, well, they're in a trailer home, and that's their problem, and don't expect me to pay for them. Now, that's an attitude you sometimes hear, and it's the attitude that's precisely the result of meritocracy. Now, I think it's absolutely impossible to have a meritocracy. It's completely crazy to imagine that we will ever reach a society where people will really deserve their success and totally deserve their failure. There is simply too many factors in anybody's life, and to expect that you can simply take a reading of somebody's life and determine from that whether they deserve to be there or not is simply unbelievable. Again, if we go back to our Romans and our Stoics, think of the goddess of fortune. An ancient Roman who did well did not think that he or she was entirely responsible for the success. They knew that it was the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune had done it. And so instantly, if something went right, you went to give an offering to the goddess of fortune to basically say thank you. I didn't sell my company for millions of pounds. I didn't, win public office. The goddess of fortune gave this to me. It's a gift. And that gift may be taken away. I don't own it. That gift says nothing about me. That gift is really, as it were, in the hands of somebody else. Again, we've lost sight of this. We've become much more optimistic. We believe that we are in control of our destinies, and with that belief in control comes serious self-esteem. People commit suicide, weirdly, a lot more nowadays, and a lot more in societies which are felt to be individualistic, where the individual is felt to be entirely in control of his destiny. The rate of suicide goes up. And the reason for that is that all failure is assumed to be a personal point of blame. So people assume their success and they assume personally their failure. And that's why rates of suicide are higher. The interesting thing about a recession is that in recessions, certain kinds of suicide go down in number. Why is that? Because suddenly there is a public explanation for failure. And that public explanation is a huge burden that's lifted off our backs. In fact, people continue to fail at all times of the economic cycle, but suddenly there's a story, a publicly available story for why there is failure. And that publicly available story is very important. And what I want to suggest is really that these stories of public failure have disappeared in the narrative that we tell ourselves about what life is like. I mean, if we look at the history of work, and how people view work, for nowadays, people expect that their work will be an arena of fulfillment and happiness. That is the sort of basic assumption that we have and that constantly is held before us. A completely insane idea historically, where work was assumed to be. I mean, if you listen to the ancient Greeks, work is slavery. And if you want to have a good life, you simply have to take yourself out of the financial system. You cannot. The pleasurable sides of existence are not those circumscribed within the boundaries of work. And in early Christianity, a similar kind of belief that that work is essentially a punishment for the sins of Adam. That's why we toil. That idea starts to disappear. By the time you get to the 18th century, various bourgeois philosophers are singing the praises of work. Work is a place to realize yourself, to become yourself, to become, someone who's someone who you can take out of yourself something that's precious and put it out there and get paid for it. A beautiful idea, but again, an idea with all sorts of casualties. Because incidentally, the optimistic idea of work kicks in at roughly the same time that the optimistic idea of love comes about. The 18th century is a curious time. Mid-18th century, a lot of bourgeois philosophers come up with a new idea of love. The idea is that suddenly you should marry someone that you love. Completely mad idea historically. Previously, you don't marry someone you love, you marry somebody who's got the farm next door. You hand over the family property. That's how you do it. But suddenly a new idea. No, you should marry someone that you love, and that's how marriage should work. And similarly, you should get a job that you love as well. You should realize yourself. So suddenly, these two vital safety valves, the hobby and the mistress, go out of the window. For hundreds of years, your real working life happens on your not your real life, your real life, not real. Your real life happens on the weekend, in the evenings, in your spare time. That's the time of enjoyment. And similarly, your real love life goes on in extracurricular activity. But suddenly, this new, better idea. I know some people who are very happily married, and I know some people who really enjoy their jobs, but they're a real minority. I would estimate around 5% of people I've ever come across are in that lucky band. So it's very odd that the other 95% of us have before us, as an idea of normality, an ideal which has failed 95% of us. It's a very, very bizarre philosophy of life, that we should be holding up as normal something which is clearly almost beautifully rare. So we have holding up before us as an idea of normality something which is anything other than normal. I want to talk more about the cheerful sides of pessimism and how to be happily sad. One of the things that I think we should all do a lot more is put skulls on our desks. In the Middle Ages and the early modern period, a vital piece of interior design was a skull. If you'd finished a beautiful desk, a mahogany desk or whatever, one of the ways, you put your quill pen, but also a skull. A skull was something you'd always put on your desk. And the reason for that is that as you were doing your work, you'd always look at the skull and think, I'm going to be like him in a little while. And the point was not to despair, but precisely to focus on what's important. Because I think one of the things about the thought of death is that it doesn't make you think that life is meaningless, far from it. It simply readjusts your priorities. Any of us who've been in a near-death experience, or, let's face it, all of us are in near-death experiences. We're in a near-death experience right now because, you could fall on your head and you would be dead. So life is a near-death experience. But any of us who've come really close to a near-death experience will report the following thing, that some things started to matter a lot and other things started to matter a bit less. And the things that tend to matter a lot less are what other people think about you and certain aspects of your career. And the things that start to matter a lot more are what people you really like think of you. Very unusual idea, but something that only tends to occur to us on our deathbed, So the contemplation of death, a very, very important part of a healthy life. And I don't have a skull, but as I say, I would like all of us to reflect on death more regularly, and hopefully there'll be time at the end for us to do that. Other things to do, if you're a tourist, ruins. I don't know if any of you like ruins. I love ruins, but head out to see some ruins. There's some wonderful ruins, obviously, in ancient Egypt, in Greece. They're quite good too. But also there's some modern industrial ruins. Head up north to parts of northern England. Head to the Mojave Desert, where there's a famous plane graveyard, where most of the world's airlines are currently parking their airliners. It's good to see modern civilization in crumbling to bits. It's good to see what will happen to us in time, to make ourselves properly at home. I think we live in a world where human achievement is right at the center of what we do. And we constantly have held before us great human achievements. It's very important to balance that by getting out into nature, getting out into bits of history where we see the marks of time written into the landscape. Anything which, as it were, puts us into perspective in some way. There's a nice way of feeling small, I suppose I want to say. Very often we're made to feel small by people at work or in social life who patronize us, etc. I want to invite us to feel small in relation to the really big things: eternity, time, death. These are good things to feel small in front of. And I think that's why many of us enjoy going off to see a glacier, say, or looking down at the Earth from an aeroplane, or thinking about the polar ice caps. These vast, empty spaces make us feel small in a way which alleviates us from that agonizing sense of self-importance and egoism, which is otherwise clinging to us like a bad smell. So head out to glaciers, head out to anywhere which makes you feel properly small, and as I say, put a skull on your table. The other thing, of course, that you can do with sadness is to discover works of art that are sad. And if you are feeling a little bit sad, my advice to you is to find an artist who somehow says not, life is cheerful. That's the devil's talk, that life is cheerful. An artist who somehow makes it even grimmer. So read someone like the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, read Pascal, listen to Leonard Cohen, or indeed listen to Elton John. There's a lovely song by Elton John called Sad Songs, and listen to the first verse. Guess there are times when we all need to share a little pain, and ironing out the rough spots is the hardest part when memories remain. And it's times like these when we all need to hear the radio, because from the lips of some old singer we can share the troubles that we already know. So in other words, a sense of confirmation. It's through the sad song that our own sadness is alleviated. And on that note, I'd like to play, and all of you to sing, if you can, a little bit of Sad Songs. Take it away. Sad Songs by Elton John. All right, now. Thank you. Now, the other thing that sadness and sad songs and pessimism generally can do is to improve your sex appeal. It's a little-known fact, very rarely spoken of in the pages of fashion magazines and other such things, that sadness, as I say, can bring you dates. And it's very often thought that if you're not getting out enough, if you're not feeling attractive, if you're not pulling people in, that maybe you should feel happier, more cheerful, and suggest an image that your life is going well. I'd like to draw your attention to the leaflet that came to the parish newsletter, where on the back of it you should find a picture by Edward Hopper called Automat, painted in 1929. Here's a woman in a cafe, and I think she's rather cute. And I think one of the reasons why she's cute is because she's sad. Now, I think that Imagine this woman with a group of her girlfriends giggling away. Things have gone really happy. She's got a promotion. She's so happy. She's waving her arms about. Instantly, I find her rather less attractive. I think the reason is that when we think about love and falling in love, one of the things I think we want to do is to touch other people's sadness. Could sound rather creepy. But really what we want in a relationship is to share the sad things. I mean, what's the point of having a relationship in which you're cheerful all the time? You want to have a relationship where you can somehow unite your sadness with somebody else's sadness. Relationships are built around shared griefs. And letting a little bit of that shared grief show, even on a first date, is a good thing. Confessing how lonely you've recently been is a good thing. Particularly, I think there's a gender divide, I have to be honest. I think most men, I speak personally, most men do very much like someone who's been in a lot. We feel relaxed and, coming back to impotence, very cheered up by the sense that a woman has not got too many dates and that she's a little bit alone. So we need to admit to that. Oh, time is ticking on. So I'm gonna bring things to a close, but I think one of the things that I want you to take away from today is the advantages of living your dark moments fully, living your sadness to the full, not seeing it as some aberration, but seeing it as something that is an intrinsic part of life and something that you shouldn't run away from, but you should embrace. Standing in your room with Elton John at full blast, you should, as I say, embrace the sadness. Also read some Nietzsche. Let me quote you a little bit from Nietzsche. He says, "To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill treatment, indignities, and illness. I wish that these friends of mine should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, the wretchedness of the vanquished." In other words, Nietzsche, one of the greatest philosophers of the 19th century, possibly of all time, is advising us that anyone he cares about, he wants to suffer. Now, what on earth is going on there? The reason is simple. Nietzsche believed, like many of those who've studied the question, that somehow there is a real relationship between the ability to suffer, the ability to endure suffering and live suffering and look suffering in the face, and the capacity to do anything important or good. Let me read you another bit from Nietzsche. "If you refuse to let your suffering lie upon you for even an hour, and if you constantly try and prevent and forestall all possible distress way ahead of time, if you experience suffering and displeasure as evil, hateful, worthy of annihilation, and as a defect of existence, then it is clear that you harbour in your heart the religion of comfortableness. How little you know of human happiness, you comfortable little people. For happiness and unhappiness are sisters and even twins that either grow up together or, as in your case, shall remain small together." In other words, there's a real relationship between the capacity to endure suffering and the capacity to do great things. It's not a coincidence that Nietzsche was a teetotaler. His favourite drink was milk, and he advised us never to drink. Please, no, none of you, if you want to be Nietzscheans, don't go to the pub now. The reason for this is, let's think about what alcohol does. Alcohol is one of those things that if you're feeling a little bit sad, you've got some problems, what do? Drink. And then what happens after you've had a few drinks? You feel a bit more cheerful. Now, this is absolutely disastrous advice for Nietzsche, because Nietzsche believed that it's in moments of darkness that we have our best insights into what we need in life. If we try and stop feeling envious immediately, if we try and stop feeling bad, if when we're writing a book we feel happy with it immediately, we will never do anything good. The capacity to tolerate suffering, the capacity to be pessimistic comfortably, to endure passages of pessimism, is absolutely essential. And that's why Nietzsche thought that alcohol was a very, very bad idea. Now, there's something else that Nietzsche thought was a very bad idea, and I'm speaking in an appropriate place, and that's Christianity, famously. And he called Christianity and alcohol the two great narcotics of European civilization. And he believed that Christianity was bad for the very same reason that alcohol is bad. The reason that Christianity is bad, do excuse anybody here who's a believer, the reason he believed that Christianity was bad is because it makes us feel good too quickly. If you're worried about timidity, the New Testament tells you, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." If you're worried about having no friends, the New Testament says, "Blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company." If you're worried about an exploitative job, the New Testament advises, "Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh." So, in other words, you quickly feel better about a lot of things. Now, Nietzsche famously argued that all of us actually want many good things, like we want an active sex life, we don't want to be meek, we quite want to be clever, we want to have good jobs, but some of us give up too quickly, and we give up too quickly because we are addicted to comfortableness. We want to be comfortable so quickly, and Christianity for Nietzsche was a religion that turned all these things on its head. It was a hypocritical creed which denounces what people actually want, but are often too weak to fight for, and it praises what many of us don't want but happen to have. So in the Christian view, powerlessness becomes goodness, baseness becomes humility, submission to people one hates becomes obedience, and in Nietzsche's phrase, not being able to take revenge turns into forgiveness. Now, Nietzsche thought that was all a very, very bad idea, and he very much believed. Now, incidentally, he was poor, totally forgotten, and in many ways wretched. But the difference he thought was that he embraced the darkness. He didn't say I'm sad, but he didn't say there are things wrong with my life, but they're not really wrong. He said there are things wrong with my life, and I'm sad about it. He embraced the pessimism. He admitted to the pessimism. And this is really the essence of what I'm trying to say now, that pessimism is a feature of life. It's a feature of life that we often try to run away from. By running away from it too quickly, we cut ourselves off from the opportunity to embrace this darkness and to embrace the lessons that it often brings. And we often also cut ourselves off from the deepest kind of relationships which we can have with other human beings, which are relationships based around a confession of suffering. And I think that essentially all good friendships are about confession of one sort or another. They're a confession of things that the rest of the world thinks of as unacceptable, but are in fact part of human life. So all of us now, we're going to have a little bit of time to have some tea and cakes, and also there's going to be a confessional box. But really what I hope that we'll take away from the next few minutes is going to be a sense of shared communion around the dark things and a capacity to admit among ourselves just how hard we find everybody and life. So join me in being sad and in eating some misfortune cookies, which will also be at the back. But thank you all very much, and I hope that today goes quite badly. Thank you.